Good morning. It is Thursday, December the 27th, and this is The Drill. And thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America today, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo, speaking to all you butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. So one of the effects of having unionized, or single payer health care, is unionization. And I don't hear that discussed very often. That would be one of the first things that would happen, is that everybody in the medical field that isn't unionized now, because in California at least, most, if not all, the nurses are unionized. And they're a very powerful political force. But whoever is not unionized, doctors, orderlies, etc., will become unionized very quickly. Then what you're going to end up having is the same issues and problems that you see in Europe, where somebody's always on strike. The doctors will be on strike. The nurses, the orderlies will be doing a work slowdown, that kind of thing. So you want to go in and get your free care, and maybe normally you've got to wait a couple of hours, and then, oh, whoops, the orderlies are on strike, or the nurses or whoever, and the other unions want to, of course, show solidarity with the striking union, so they're going to have a sick out, or they're going to slow down as well. So now all of a sudden you're waiting 4, 6, 8 hours to see the doctor. It's also there's not a lot of confidence I would have in such a medical system. I need to go in for surgery, and the doctors and nurses are more concerned with who's on strike and why than they are about my health. That makes me very nervous, very anxious. I would be looking at that particular point to find a place out of the country where I could get my medical care. There was a show on television that I think it was on 60 Minutes actually, where you can go to say Thailand and get elective surgery in Thailand, and you get better care at cheaper prices, sometimes a third of the cost of what you're paying here in the United States. You're attended to not by LVNs, but by RNs, and very often it's done in a resort setting. So after your surgery and you're recuperating, you get to actually lie out on the beach or near the beach. So I would suspect that if this country ever went to a single-payer system, that Thailand would be doing a pretty brisk business. And that's one thing that you got to remember, too, is that capitalism cannot be destroyed. It can only change its form. It'll move around. If the United States goes socialist, then capitalism will simply go somewhere else. It'll go to Thailand. It will go to other places around the globe, because where there's a need, somebody is going to fill it, either overtly or covertly, because that'll be the next thing that happens, is that people will be getting their medicine on the down low, so to speak, on the unofficial market, where they're going to be bribing doctors. You want to see a doctor, you don't want to wait for 4 hours. You slip them, $20, $40, $80, $100 or something, so you can get in ahead of everybody else. And so it's, again, corruption corrupts, and absolute corruption corrupts absolutely. So when I come back, I'm going to be reading from Ayn Rand's Lexicon, then I'm going to be covering Breaking Bad, Badder living through chemistry, philosophy, and Breaking Bad, and also House and Philosophy, Everybody Lies, when I come back. And thank you very much. Welcome back. And let's see what we got here. Today's concept of the day is director. In all the arts that involve more than one performer, A crucially important artist is the director. In music, his counterpart is the conductor. The director is the link between the performing and primary arts. He is a performer in relation to the primary work, in the sense that his task is the means to the end set by the work. He is a primary artist in relation to the cast, the set designer, the cameraman, etc., in the sense that they are the means to his end, which is the translation of the work into physical action as a meaningful, stylized, integrated whole. In the dramatic arts, the director is the aesthetic integrator. This task requires a first-hand understanding of all the arts, combined with an unusual power of abstract thought and of creative imagination. Great directors are extremely rare. An average director alternates between the twin pitfalls of abdication and usurpation. Either he rides on the talents of others and merely puts the actors through random motions signifying nothing, which results in a hodgepodge of clashing intentions, or he hogs the show, putting everyone through senseless tricks unrelated to or obliterating the play, if any, on the inverted premise that the play is the means to the end of exhibiting his skill, thus placing himself in the category of circus acrobats, except that he is much less skillful and much less entertaining. So, and that was director, the concept of the day from the Ayn Rand lexicon. And when I come back, I'm going to be reading from Breaking Bad, Philosophy in Breaking Bad, Bad or Living Through Chemistry. And thank you very much. Welcome back. Breaking Bad and Philosophy, Bad or Living Through Chemistry. So when I left this in Chapter 3, they were on about getting into the confrontation that Skylar had. She had like an intervention. She got the family, friends, and relatives to surround Walt once his cancer was diagnosed, and was going to sit down and convince him that he had to go through with the treatment and fight the good fight, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to skip the rest of that chapter because I think that we've kind of gotten the gist of that, and move on to Chapter 4, which is called Finding Happiness in a Black Hat, and it's written by Kimberly Baltzer-Giray. But though I have wept and fasted, wept and prayed, though I have seen my head, grown slightly bald, brought in upon a platter, I'm no prophet, and here's no great matter. I've seen the moment of my greatness flicker, and I've seen the eternal footman hold my coat and snicker. And in short, I was afraid. And it's called The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. At the beginning of the Breaking Bad story, Walter White has a lot in common with J. Alfred Prufrock. Prufrock is filled with regret about his life because he has been indecisive, inarticulate, anxious, and overly concerned about how his actions will be judged by others, to the point of being almost paralyzed. Prufrock's been living a very inauthentic life, one where he's failed to define himself as a free individual. Walt, too, has a lot of regrets about his life and appears to be a victim of circumstance. He's an underpaid, overeducated chemistry teacher whose promising career was cut short by greedy, fair-weather friends. He works part-time at a car wash to make ends meet. He lives with an overbearing wife, a disabled teenage son, and a new baby on the way, and he's been told he'll soon die from cancer. Existentialists like Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre would say that Walt, like Prufrock, is living deeply in something called bad faith, which is a bad thing, which you probably gathered given the bad part, whereby someone adopts false values and doesn't live a rational and truly free life. Walt fails to see the absurdity of it all, that the universe is silent, purposeless, and ultimately meaningless. According to the existentialists, Walt's life lacks authenticity. He fails to take hold of his freedom and responsibility because he sees himself as defined completely by others. However, there's one major difference between Walter White and J. Alfred Prufrock. Walt takes his cancer diagnosis as a wake-up call to become a free individual and define what remains of his life. Whereas with Prufrock, we're left at the end of the poem with the impression that he's fated to live and die in the same inauthentic frame of mind. Believe it or not, when Walt becomes Heisenberg, the meth cooker and dealer, he becomes an authentic individual, the ideal person Camus and Sartre speak of. Finding the balance between defining himself in the role of his play and shaping him, he acknowledges the absurdity of the universe and his inevitable death, and he takes hold of his freedom and responsibility for his choices. Heisenberg is an alter ego, but is Walt becoming true to himself and living in good faith. Walt as Heisenberg is like the mythical character Sisyphus, endlessly pushing his rock up the mountain, filled with rebellion and a silent joy, since his fate and his essence belong to him and no one else. And like Sisyphus, we must imagine Walt is happy. Who'd have thought the choice to become a drug dealer would bring about such benefits? Born without a God. Existentialism is a philosophy of the ground rather than the sky, a philosophy of the streets of man, born without a God, without the necessity of an objective truth, and without an overriding moral code. It pertains to the daily lives of everyone, not just professional philosophers, and in fact many of us practice ideas central to existentialism without even being aware we're doing it. It can best be described as a 20th century philosophy that focuses on existence and how people find themselves existing in the world. The slogan of existentialism is, existence comes before essence. A person comes into existence, and only after that, through free will, choice, and responsibility, defines their self, creates meaning in their life, and continues the search and discovery of who they are until death comes. Not an easy task at all, since decisions often come with consequences and stress, and people are entirely responsible for their actions. This is precisely why anguish is another key concept existentialists speak of. I feel anguish because nothing other than my free will makes me choose how to act. I am ultimately responsible for myself, and these free actions have consequences for myself and the others around me. Since my personal responsibility extends to others, and I recognize this fact, however, this is not a philosophy of do whatever I want whenever I feel like it. In fact, because there's no God out there who is given humans moral values to live by, we're all the more responsible for making moral laws that people can live by so as to interact with one another in peace and good faith. That there's nothing out there in the universe but the harshness of a purposeless and meaningless reality doesn't mean that we don't try to make meaning, purpose, and morality in our lives. In other words, we actually live a life of contradiction. There's no purpose or meaning to life, and so we try to create a purpose or meaning to life anyhow, instead of just kind of sitting back and accepting the fate, so to speak, which is all BS. This is another situation where you had so-called philosophers that are really creating not a philosophy, but a psychology, an attitude. Nothing that they are proposing here has there's no evidence or proof that any of the things that Sartre and Camus are asserting are true. There's no proof that any of this is that things are the way they say they are. A lot of this is about, again, simply ignoring 2,000 years worth of intellectual history and starting over, starting from scratch, asking yourself a question that's already been asked 2,000 years ago and answered 2,000 years ago, but coming up with your own answer. And psychologizing rather than philosophizing, dealing with the emotions, the idea of anguish, and other types of psychological and emotional states rather than intellectual, looking at the situation intellectually. I was also looking at, not an easy task, as decision come with consequences and stress. People are entirely responsible for their actions. Practice ideas central. Let's see, the focus on existence, how people find themselves existing in the world. Precisely why anguish is another key concept. Nothing in my free will makes me choose how to act. I'm ultimately responsible for myself. Extends other than recognize, however, no, it was in here somewhere that I creates meaning in their life and continues the search of discovery. Oh, that was it. Yes, right here. A person comes into existence, and only after that, through free will, choice, and responsibility, defines their self, creates meaning in their life, and continues the search and discovery of who they are until death comes. And that was one of the jokes of the 60s and 70s. And this is again to show that philosophy does have influence, indirect, but it does have influence in our life. But that was the thing in the 60s and 70s. People, teenagers usually, people in their late teens, early 20s, would leave home, and they would tell their parents, "I'm off to go find myself." And that's exactly what they were talking about, was what Camus and Sartre were saying, that they were trying to become authentic individuals, find out who they are, and then live true to who it is that they are. Instead of saying, hey, I'm 18 years old, it's time for me to go to school, I've got to maybe go to college, go to a trade school, go into my father's business, and get on with life. They think that what they're going to do is they're going to take a time out and go try to discover who it is that they are, or who it is that they really are, the authentic self is, and then come back and pick up where they left off. Baloney. Time waits for no one. All you end up doing in that particular situation is wasting time. It's a recipe not for happiness, but for misery. Misery, depression, suicide. It's a rat hole. It's a psychological rat hole. That's what Sartre and Camus have created, and very much so because of Descartes, who was the original guy, so-called philosopher, that again took 2,000 years worth of intellectual history and threw it away. He felt that it was somehow, dictatorial or confining or whatever his psychological issue was with learning, and he just threw it away and just started making things up as he went along. Started asking questions that had already been answered and coming up with his own answers. Wrong, therefore. And other so-called philosophers have done pretty much the same thing. Nietzsche, Kant, and others. And this is why it's important to read, to study, to know and understand as far back as you can the philosophical issues of the day. One of the issues, for instance, is learning. Epistemologically, is a study of learning and knowledge. One of the bigger questions was, is knowledge innate or is it acquired? Is it something we're born with, or do we acquire it along the way? Are we born a blank slate? And so it seems to me obvious, and I think to everyone, that through the evidence of our senses, that we're born blank slates. That the only difference in intelligence is how rapidly we learn, how rapidly we accumulate knowledge. And but that was one of the issues that was dealt with by Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, again going back 2,000 years. Plato was the one that came up with the term anamnesis, because he supported the idea that we're all born with all the knowledge we're ever going to have, and that expressing that knowledge is simply a matter of rooting around in one's memory to find that information and then regurgitating it. And he referred to that process as anamnesis. You can hear Rush Limbaugh doing that. Rush Limbaugh is somebody that believes that all knowledge is innate and not acquired. Also, people may be asking, so what? Who cares whether it's innate, acquired, or whatever? It makes a difference from an educational standpoint. If all knowledge is innate and not acquired, then why do we bother to go to school? Rush Limbaugh was one, he said many times that when he was in high school, he wanted to get the hell out of there. He wanted to get the hell out of high school so he could get on with his life and go, get on with his ambitions. Okay, he saw no purpose to school. And that's the only reason he saw no purpose to it was because, and I grew up roughly, he's 10 years older than I am, but about the same time, and I got the same messages from society, from the left, when I was going to school as he did. And that was, knowledge is, innate. Everybody's born with all the knowledge they're going to have, and so going to school is useless and a waste of time. And people that were book smart, people that spent time doing their homework and writing their essays and getting good grades were sneered at. And I found myself intimidated to the point where it affected my grade point average. I had a much lower grade point average than I should have had. And I just didn't perform very well academically as I could have performed academically. Some of that also was about the differences in school systems. I went from one school system to another, and some school systems were very lenient in the way they graded, and some were not. So that made it also a difference. But that's a little side note there. But the point is that it does matter. Philosophy and philosophical issues do matter. If knowledge is innate, then why do we bother with going to school? Also, if knowledge is innate and I'm born with more knowledge than you have, don't I have then some sort of obligation, some sort of automatic obligation to share with you my knowledge, right? Why would you go to the library or the bookstore? What you do is you simply go find a smart person and have them solve your problems for you. See? But if it is, as I claim, that and that it's obvious that knowledge is acquired, then everything is different. School has a purpose again. I no longer have an automatic obligation to inform people that are slower than I am. If I can accumulate knowledge, so can they. It may take them a little longer, but they can accumulate it just the same as I do. So, when I come back, I'm going to be reading from House, Philosophy in House, Everyone Lies. Thank you very much. Welcome back. So, let me see. I want to check something here. Because he was on and on about Sherlock Holmes. I don't even know why I bothered with that chapter. It really had little or nothing to do with philosophy, as far as I'm concerned. So, I'm going to take a look real quick here at chapter 6 and see if this is something that we want to explore. Okay, so actually I'm going to skip to chapter 8. Being nice is overrated. House and Socrates on the necessity of conflict by Melanie Frappier. What's wrong with them? Are House and Socrates two raving lunatics? House and Socrates, two cases, same symptoms. House's best friends describe him as rude, arrogant, and offensive. He never misses a chance to sarcastically pick people apart. He refuses any administrative or clinic duty. His sharp mind has made him a leading expert in diagnostic medicine, yet he doesn't write up his medical cases for journals. The ducklings, Foreman, Cameron, and Chase, do it for him. The only person who sometimes manages to control House is Cuddy, the dean of medicine and hospital administrator. While she admits that he is the best doctor she has, House's obsession with his cases is at times a costly nightmare. He hides when on compulsory clinic duty. His unorthodox and sometimes outright unauthorized treatments lead to billing problems and lawsuits. His refusal to endorse a new drug cost the hospital a $100 million donation. He destroys the hospital's MRI machine, attempting to scan the bullet-ridden skull of a corpse. A scan Cuddy had, of course, forbidden. House doesn't show any more concern for people than for financial matters. He bursts in on other doctors when they're with their patients or calls them in the middle of the night to discuss his cases. Yet he doesn't listen to their opinions, turning down each of their answers with sarcasm and taking a vicious pleasure in humiliating them in front of their peers and patients. An equal opportunity offender, House is aggressive and demeaning with his own patients. Is House simply a raving lunatic, or is his obnoxious behavior a symptom of a more serious condition? We could paraphrase House in the Socratic method and answer, pick your specialist, you pick your symptoms. I'm a jerk, it's my only symptom. I go see 3 doctors. The neurologist tells me it's my pituitary gland. The endocrinologist says it's the adrenal gland tumor, an adrenal gland tumor. The intensivist can't be bothered, sends me to a witty philosopher who tells me I push others because I think I'm Socrates. Socrates? If there was someone ancient Greeks thought was a pest, it was he. He was probably a stonemason by trade, but Socrates clearly preferred to spend his time discussing philosophy, nagging others with questions about truth, beauty, and justice. He didn't write anything himself, yet the oracle at Delphi declared, quote, no one is wiser, unquote. Bright young Athenians like Plato and Xenophon were Socrates' ducklings and immortalized him as the main character of their dialogues. Because Socrates neglected his work in favor of philosophy, he was poor. Unable to properly provide for his children, Socrates was pursued throughout the city by his sharp-tongued wife, Xanthippe. while Xanthippe is remembered as the only person who ever won an argument against Socrates, much like Cuddy's the only one who sometimes bends House's will, her admonitions had only a moderate influence on her strong-headed husband. Like House, Socrates showed little empathy when engaging people in philosophical debates. While, unlike House, Socrates valued friendship, people were quick to point out that discussions with him were as pleasant as a stingray's electric charge. Such unpleasantness was justified, however, because Socrates believed himself to be on a godly mission to show people that they didn't know anything. Part of this mission was to undo the work of the sophists, who taught the art of winning arguments for the sake of winning arguments, rather than achieving the truth. Why stun and confuse people with ironical questions if afterwards you only insult them and reject their answer? The answer lies in the so-called Socratic method. So one of the things about Socrates and Socratic method is that the Socratic method is based on fiction, and the fiction is that the person doing the Socratic method is neutral. Neutral. That's why one of the reasons that it works best in a courtroom situation with lawyers. Okay, if a lawyer is defending somebody either in a lawsuit or in a criminal matter, that lawyer is going to use the Socratic method for dealing with or interrogating or cross-examining witnesses, because the defendant cannot prove a negative. Okay, the defendant is charged with a particular crime, and that's why it is the burden of proof is always on the accuser to make their case and not on the defendant to prove anything. So, but there is the ability to cast doubt. And Socrates didn't prove anything or disprove anything. All he did was cast doubt, or at least get the person that was speaking to him to express a doubt. They make a statement of certainty. Socrates would then come along and question that statement, and in an effort to put doubt in the mind of the person that had expressed it in the first place. But in order for him to do that, he has to pretend that he is neutral, that he has no dog in the fight, so to speak, that he has no particular interest in the outcome of the situation one way or another. Again, that not that he's looking for the truth, but that he is actually arguing for the sake of argument. And in all reality, Socrates was no less of a sophist than the sophists he was supposedly opposing. So, on that note, we find ourselves at the end of the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. And until next time, thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.